Hello and welcome to the Grand Cinema Hotel, a podcast hosted by two friends who love cinema. Tonight you'll be staying in room 179, City of God, the Brazilian crime drama directed by Fernando Meirelles. So go ahead, get comfortable and throw on that Do Not Disturb sign as we take a trip to the slums of Rio de Janeiro and City of God.
Rio de Janeiro, the beach, the nightlife, the romance. But 15 miles from paradise is a place called the City of God. A place where one man must infiltrate a war between two crime lords to tell a story the world needs to know.
What's going on, all my children of the slums, and thank you for checking back in. As always, if you're listening to this on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe as it goes a long way to help the channel. And if you're listening to this on any of your favorite podcast platform, why don't you go ahead and drop us a like or a subscription or whatever you do on those apps. My name is Gus, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Alvaro.
What's up, guys?
And we're here today to bring back another old movie. I didn't realize at the time that it was 1 year apart from Old Boy, which we did last time. And even when we did The Player a couple weeks ago, we talked about the 90s and 2000s not being an era of movies that's really too fondly remembered nowadays. But we've been on a...
We remember them fondly.
Yeah, we've been on some heaters lately of these movies that are technically like from our childhood,
Yeah.
even if they don't feel like that because, you know, whenever you watched it for the first time. City of God, though, what a fucking movie, right?
Yeah.
Like, what a great movie.
I like that you said from our childhood too, because I think this one more than Old Boy. Like I told you, I'm kind of late to the Old Boy because I kind of saw it now that we're older. But City of God is a movie that I seen. I remember back. I was in 6th grade, so it must have been maybe 06, 05.
Yeah, so a few years after it comes out, right? Which
Yeah.
is commonplace for something like a Brazilian movie, right?
Yeah.
Is this your first Brazilian movie? It's for sure mine.
Yeah, it is. So I think that's where kind of I have a little bit of a story more than other movies, is because I've always kind of, really watched soccer my whole life. And my dad's always been really ingrained, I guess, in really liking Brazilian culture. So I remember this movie. There used to be a guy who would come by and always sell us DVDs. And he, I think, was more attracted to this movie based off of that it was a Brazilian movie and that he had it. So it seemed like this must be something pretty serious if it's being in circulation here,
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I did want to tackle that angle first of the whole Brazil of it all. 2002, could Brazil be any more on top, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like you have Ronaldinho and R9, Ronaldo and Rivaldo and like Roberto Carlos, right? All of these guys who are part of this just fantastic World Cup winning team. For me, my correlation to the Brazil national team, honestly, it's all through history. That's for me too early. My first World Cup memory is Zidane headbutting Materazzi, right? Yeah, that's my first World Cup memory. So going back and always seeing that the cultural influence that Brazil had in the early 2000s on the whole world is kind of unlike anything that we've seen in recent times, I would say, with a Latin country.
You know what else it was too is Giselle, the Brazilian supermodels for Victoria's.
Oh, like Adriana Lima and stuff, right? It's like the Brazilian boom, honestly, of the early 2000s.
They were literally like what you're talking about. They were forefronting a lot of ventures, and people were highly interested in that era. It seemed just perfect.
I don't think Brazilian music. I don't know if Brazilian people make reggaeton either, but I'm just saying like that. In that influence of that early 2000s of like the Latin culture, even in music too. It's like Shakira, Ricky Martin, it's like a bunch of reggaeton stuff a couple years later. And it's kind of like the beginning of a turning point that's like it started, but then it didn't last very long. And we probably still haven't gotten back to this level of like Latin influence in the culture, right? I mean, now we have like Bad Bunny and Peso Pluma, I guess, right? But not like these cultural global superstars. I mean, I guess Bad Bunny is, right? But just that 2002, it's like what a peak for Brazilians, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, obviously back to more of the movie, but I understand what you mean, the cultural context here of this movie. Actually, before the research that I did for, today, I didn't know how well regarded this movie was, even to
It's one of the great movies
Oscar,
of the 21st
yeah,
century.
like even as the Academy.
5 Oscar nominations, no foreign film, which is weird, but best adapted screenplay, best director, best editing, best cinematography. Not to get too ahead of ourselves,
yeah.
but yeah.
No,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's not, we just happened to be part of something that was great with this one. We were part of it as it, like you said, 3 years within it coming out. I do feel kind of attached to knowing that since the first time I saw this movie, I knew this movie was special. And I think it's because before especially at the age that I saw it, I had not seen a movie like this. And had I seen Old Boy, I would have felt differently. But this, since we're doing them back to back, is the same love I have for Old Boy, except I had it as a kid because I had only seen this movie.
Do you remember that when we first really started hanging out a lot, this is a movie I had brought up to you, and I was like, have you seen this? And like, we watched this maybe 2 or 3 times, like in the first couple of years of hanging out. And it was like, man, I remember this being like one of the first movies that we really bonded over, of like, man, this movie's so fucking good, right?
Yeah.
Like, I remember I showed my wife when she was my girlfriend at the time. I watched it with you. I watched it with another one of my mutual friends, and it's like, this is one of those ones where I spread the word about this movie, but it had been a couple of years since I seen it. But I've seen it enough times to where it feels like an old friend, you know what I mean? Like, I knew everything that was going to happen when it was going to happen. The only thing I don't remember is just like the exact dialogue or anything like that. But it's a movie that has just been stuck in my brain since the very first time I've seen it. And I'll get even more ahead of myself talking about like just overall rankings of all movies. When Sight and Sound did their top 10 a while ago, and you know how everybody was just putting out their like Sight and Sound top 10s or whatever, it's like if anybody asked me, this is on there for me. This is one of my 10 favorite movies of all time. I do think that this is one of the great movies of the 21st century. Like, it's right up there with Children of Men and Old Boy and There Will Be Blood and movies like that, right? What?
No, I agree.
The Kill Bills,
Yeah.
The works of Bong Joon-ho, the works of Wes Anderson. Like, I do think that this is an integral piece of not just international cinema, but just cinema as a whole. And because it is part of that crime genre, I do feel like it will always be influenced by previous work. But I also think that this movie is a benchmark of everything that comes after it, trying to be City of God-esque. Like, we probably have both seen that movie Sin Nombre.
Yeah.
Right? Or do you know about City of Men, which is like a spin-off? It's not a sequel, but it's a spin-off of this story. It's a more dramedy, dark comedy type of story, less violence. Fernando Mireles and I don't know if you saw, I never knew this at the time, that there was a co-director of this movie. Her name's Katja Lund. So the both of them did a spin-off show called City of Men, and some of the same actors carried over, like the guy who plays Buscapé and Lil Dice, like the actual kid version of him. He was 5 years older at the time, so they casted him as I believe like a teen in that show, and then it became a movie too. So a lot of legs from this franchise, or kind of like a franchise.
Yeah.
And also, I didn't know this either. It's based off of a 1997 book called the same thing. I didn't really look too far into how like beat for beat it is, book and movie, but I do think that the novel-like aspect of this story structure for sure carries through. Like, you can tell that it was written in a way that's not like a normal movie.
Yeah.
Because its story structure and its like lack of a main narrative, you don't really see movies like this that much now. Like, it's easy to think of Pulp Fiction and like Rashomon or things like that, like these big examples of jumping around in different times and telling a story. But City of God is a 2-hour movie that tells a 15-year story and is constantly jumping from one thing to another, and it's just not movie like. Like, it's more like an open world, not a game, but like open world concept. It's like every character is important. Something that happened off screen is more important than what is happening on screen, and it's going to affect the story 20 minutes later in a staggeringly like heavy way. You know what I mean? Like, you just never know. Like, every background character that's introduced has their moment to shine in this movie.
I know. I agree. I think one of my favorite aspects of this movie is when they introduce a character that you haven't seen on screen yet. They'll tell you, be like, and that's so and so, you know, and well, you're not ready yet to hear that story. We're not there yet.
Yeah, an example would be like Carrot, right?
Yeah.
And when they're telling, it's like Buscape goes to buy weed at his friend's house, right? And then it's like, this is Lil Zay tries to take the apartment. And then he's like, this is my apartment. And then like, oh, well, now you need to know the story of this apartment. And then the story goes back however many years. It was this lady's apartment. She used to sell drugs to provide for her daughter. Her boyfriend moves in. Her boyfriend takes it from her. Her boyfriend gets arrested by the cops. Blackie moves in. Blackie becomes the person who is like kind of running that apartment complex, I guess, right? And like, Carrot gives him the apartment, right? And then Carrot fucking gives it to Blackie, and then Blackie gets taken from him by Lil Zay. Be like, and all just within 2 minutes, you know? And you're like, so much world building, and there's also a kind of a lack of exposition, honestly. The movie isn't about people discovering things or things like them trying to investigate, like, oh, what is this gonna lead to, you know? Like, it's not limiting at all in any way. Like, it's so open that you never can see what's going to happen next. And I do think a lot of other movies don't really have that, you know, where it's like A, B, climax, the ending, you know?
I think one of the scenes that really highlights to me, like, where they just understood how to tension build really well, is that you're introduced to Lil Zay pretty, like, first on in the story, you know?
And he's
like,
Little D-Say.
And yeah, exactly. And certain things happen in the movie. Like I said, we'll get into spoilers a little later, but certain things happen in the story where you don't get answers from, and then they keep those things from you till the perfect revelation, so they could literally perfectly character develop the person that they're trying to get to you, and literally show you, be like, you thought he was like this, but he's like this, and that's what keeps you on your toes in terms of, oh, I didn't know this is how dark we were getting. I didn't know this is the kind of person that we were dealing with, or I didn't know polar opposite, like someone like Carrot is like, oh, he's actually very caring, as opposed to what you would think about him, right? Mm-hmm. So all of those things is they take, like you said, those 15 years of build, and then you have the whole in the beginning where they talk about their brothers, which had happened, 10 years prior.
The Tender Trio. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, when you go back and you see the story of the three, they're not all older brothers. Two of them are older brothers, and one of them's just like a friend from the neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
That you see the evolution of these characters and how they go from 15 years ago, Shaggy and Goose and I forget what the other guy's name is. They're just robbing the local gas trucks, and they're kind of Robin Hoods, like they celebrate their successes with the slum, they throw money in the air, they give it away. The slum never turns on them, right? But then the story, obviously, every action has a consequence in this story. So that leads to the next generation, buying guns and selling cocaine. And then by the end, this is a spoiler, you have a whole new generation of kids that murdered the old generation, and it's their time now. And it's like, it progressively gets like younger and younger too. Yeah. So it's like this cycle of violence that just never ends. It's like a snake eating its own tail, or like that saying, like, violence begets violence, right? It's like everything that happens in here is because of something someone else did, and they were never integral until boom, bite you in the ass. All of a sudden you're getting shot in the back by some kid whose dad you killed, and it's like, dude, like it's so real, like anyone who knows anything about, impoverished areas know that's like, it's not that these people are just like inherently violent, but when there's this lawlessness and lack of care or regard for each other's lives, it's like, I don't even know how to really describe it, like, I'm not going to pretend like I know about this, but I'm just saying I've seen enough of the world to know it's like, yeah, this is what happens when you make people desperate and hungry, and there's no law, no law and order.
There's a scene where one of the business owners is getting robbed by the little kids, right? The gang, they're the gang of their own, ran by Carrot, which becomes a moment of tension. But what does the shop owner do? It's not like he goes to the cops.
Well, what is he
You
gonna
know,
do? Right?
he goes to Little Zay. Be like, can you handle this? And it's how, and even in this crime world, everybody knows that the cops can't actually help you in the type of world that you live in. So you go and tell somebody that you know is going to go. And the next scenes that precede that are some of the, most dark shit that's in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, this movie really is like. I always feel like an old lady if I'm like, wow, that was shocking and disturbing, but I don't think it's what you were actually seeing, because honestly, a lot of the violence does take place out of frame.
Mhm.
It's like an implied
It's
violence.
implied.
It's like in Reservoir Dogs. Everyone swears they seen them cut off the ear, but that never happened. Like that happens off screen, or when we did Knock at the Cabin, and like those kills that are like really visceral and just gruesome. You don't even actually see it.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah,
remember?
a lot of that
Every time
too,
we
right?
realized we watched it. None of this is actually.
Just so gritty and authentic
Yeah.
too. Like, and people love to throw those words around, but I don't know if you did any research onto the actual cast of this movie, but it's like these really are young kids from these favelas, and the only real actor who's ever been in anything else or actually had any type of training was the guy who played Carrot. He's the only one who'd ever been involved in this world. So that performance of like Lil Zed's like, that is one of the great performances of.
Because he's seen somebody like that.
Yeah,
So
or who knows? He is somebody
Yeah,
like that for
exactly.
all you know, right? But it's just something you can't get. And I always like to think of like the Safdie brothers now. They like to do that, right?
John
And even when you
Cassavetes,
do
right?
stuff like that, though, now there's no romanticizing it, because like you think of the Safdies and the trouble that happens on like the set of Good Time, right? With the underage girl, she's in an uncomfortable position. The producer, scumbag. Like the directors apparently don't really know what's going on. You have her in a scene with a guy who's not an actor, who's recently released from prison, right? And it's like, these are things that are not really like justified now, I guess,
Yeah.
right? Like nobody thinks that those are good ideas anymore. But there's also a level of realness that you can't get from having actors do this. And like, I know we always like to laugh at the old quote about like Laurence Olivier, like, just try acting, my boy, right? But I don't know. This movie has a very documentary-like feel to it, and you can't get that without having these kids in the movie.
It's like very similar to the movie Kids, right? From before, like where it's obviously frowned upon now in America to do that because we don't need to be doing that. But the perspectives of an outside world are so that these things are realities. So, I mean, I think that's what makes it, shocking, like you're saying, to us, because it is just insane to see. When me and you were playing Pokemon cards, if we had guns instead.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about 6-year-old kids getting shot in the feet because they stole something,
Yeah.
And it's like or even in the beginning of the movie, where one of the friends says that he's going to go find God, right? And the cops run up on him, and the guy standing behind him, who looks pretty similar and was wearing a similar outfit, he's the one who takes off and runs, and he's the one who dies and gets shot. And the cops are just like, fuck it wasn't
must have
him,
been him,
Like,
yeah.
whatever, who cares? No one's even going to notice that this guy died. And it's just a level of, like you said, when you're a 6-year-old in the United States playing Pokemon, you couldn't even imagine that this is the world that some people are living in, right?
Yeah.
And the other reason they had to do this was because in the time that this movie was made, there was basically only white or light-skinned actors working in Brazil. So Fernando Meirelles says that there was 5 black actors in Brazilian movie making at the time. And he just felt like, okay, well, for one, that's not enough. There's probably like somewhere between 30 to 40 characters in this movie.
Yeah.
And not just extras, like people with speaking lines and stuff.
And the thing is, the majority of the reality that we're talking about, the majority of Brazil is dark.
Yeah.
So-
And it's like, so he kind of helped open a door for now, it went from 5 to 500, to 5,000 to 10,000. It's like, yeah, I'm not really going to speak on the race relations of how Brazilian film world works or whatever, but I can assume it's much like everywhere else,
Yeah.
And it's like, this is all couldn't happen soon enough and somehow too late at the same time, right? But there's also a negative side to this movie. A lot of people have seen this movie as a black eye or a stain on Brazilian culture of being exploitative to these children, and also, you know, giving the slums of Brazil a bad name. And I don't know, as an American, it feels weird to sit here and be like, well, it's a fucking slum in Brazil. You know, it's like, who am I to speak on why these people act the way they do? But there's a rapper, his name's, I think, MV Bill, and he's from the real city of God. And he has always been an advocate that this movie is nothing more than a negative connotation and has done nothing but like give the area even more of a bad name than it already had before it came out. So I don't, you know, who are we to say like, no, he's wrong, yes, he's right. But that is just part of the reality of a movie like this, right? It's like you're exposing something that's so real and so authentic, and it hits so close to home for some of these people that to see it, I don't know. Maybe you don't want to see it, you know? Like, this is a huge gap, but you know how the Japanese people are mad about Oppenheimer, right? And they're like, how could you make this movie, right? And just act like this is something that needs to be shown to people. But we're talking about two completely different things. We're talking about gangs and the slums versus the mass genocide of a population.
The same though, like, you know what I mean? Like, the Japanese are like, and what if we made a Hitler movie, right? Like, that's how they see it.
I mean, there's a lot of filmmakers who have said that Steven Spielberg is wrong for making Schindler's List, because making any movie about the Holocaust is exploitative and romanticizes and glamorizes it, whether you're showing how bad it is or not. That it's like, it's something so unspeakable and so evil that it shouldn't be, you know, it's not for public consumption. So
I get you, but
what are you going to do, right?
It's the same sentiment though. I get what you're saying, that like, the argument here could be like it made things worse, but at the end of the day, it only comes with movies that are powerful, and movies that are influential.
This is a powerful, influential movie. I don't know if when you were doing your research, because you were talking about how you saw that it was, how well regarded it is as a movie. That just not just the Academy Awards, right? 5 nominations, no wins there, 55 wins in total. So it's like, yeah, this movie definitely got its love, right? It premieres at Cannes. The cast goes. It's their first. I mean, the parallels to actual football are insane, because it's like, yeah, this is the same thing as when Marquinhos signed for PSG, and it's like, this is insane.
Yeah.
Or Martinelli at fucking Arsenal, you know, like, I just got pulled from the 3rd division slums of Brazil, and now I'm playing in London, or now I'm playing in Paris, you know, and it's like the culture shock, and also that alone, like, these kids, how are they going to live after this movie, you know? And that has been a big subject of scrutiny as well, because I don't know, it's like, I don't know if it sounds bad, but it's like, you know, when like they show movies and like sci-fi and stuff, and it's like the space travelers will go to the past and drop a piece of information there, and it completely changes the trajectory of their lives. These kids, they all really come from this area, so then what are you going to do now? Like, you can't just drop them off back in the slums, right? Mm. And it's like they had to create some kind of like halfway house program of like, how do we try to integrate them into what is quote unquote normal society? Because like that is even prevalent theme in the movie, is like some of these people want to get out and be part of normal society, but it's like the sad truth of the thing is like, you're probably just going to get eaten alive by this city.
Yeah.
And like the character of Benny, right? He wants to leave and get out, but the world, there's no indication that the world wants him, you know? And it's like Rocket is the only one who the normal world comes to pull him out of the slums. And he's the only one who really comes out of this thing probably in a good situation. But, you know, from an American perspective, it's like, what does that even mean, that you work at a newspaper? Now you can afford fucking food? Like, you're still not rich. You probably still live in a what would be considered like a impoverished area, right?
I guess the problem is, in a place like that, just having an honorable job is already, like, I have no need to be stealing and stuff like that. And I know that perspective of how my parents talk and stuff like that, where it's like, at least I have an honorable job. You know, I do my thing. I don't need to be stealing or whatever.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
What was I gonna say about the kids? It was one more thing about the kids. There's a documentary that Fernando Mireles made 10 years later, called City of God 10 years later, and it's just a check-in with them, like what happened to all these people. I didn't get the chance to watch it, but I was able to do some skimming on YouTube and stuff like that, and just varying degrees of what you would think would happen, I guess, right? Like some of them became actors, some of them just went back into obscurity. It's like it never happened to them, you know? Like I saw in a preview for the documentary that one of the guys just like works on like bikes and cars, like, and he said, he's like, I had a taste of, you know, caviar and champagne. Like I got to taste that life and didn't really do anything for me. Like, look, I'm back here or whatever. And that's kind of like the sad truth of not just the movie, but like life too, you know? It's like, I guess you do kind of you can see it as like exploitative because you just like used them for a couple of years and like, all right, back to the fucking slums you go, you know?
Yeah.
Because not all of them are going to be actors. Of course, they're not really actors. So yeah, it makes sense that they didn't make it, you know? Even children actors here in the United States or wherever in the world, like a kid who's in E.T., he ain't been in anything else, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting world, and like the parallels between the movie and actual real life of these people is just, it's like on the same wavelength, you know?
Yeah, especially because, again, he made the decision to pull him from there. He didn't, like, you know, he didn't try to outsource. Any director from anywhere could go anywhere else and try to pull, you know, a bunch of people would be like, all right, we could tell this story not in the location or with different people. But the fact that he made the decision, they were able to. It's the argument there is that you would have never gotten to taste the caviar and want, like, if I didn't take that decision to put you in this, right?
I always think of King of Comedy. It's like better to be king for a day than schmuck for a lifetime, right?
So maybe that, I mean,
Burned bright and fast.
It sucks that, but it does come down to what you said, I think. Wanting to, if you try it and you want it, you know what it takes now to get it, whether you want to have that or not. You know, I think that that's really what makes a difference between people who are successful in any type of business. So it is interesting just because any international movie that we watch, I think that's always a component, especially if there were older movies that they weren't actors and they just ended up being kind of the same way we see, you know, artists and Picasso now. Like at their time, nobody really cared, but it took until years and years later of people recognizing great performances, which this film is full of
them. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the other thing is though too, a lot of these people are so good at playing the characters that they're in this movie because maybe they are the characters in this movie. That who knows? Like you said, are they really actors or they're just being themselves?
Yeah, it's who knows. Like, if I had to assume, one of the people who was in this movie probably did some of these crimes in real life.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. And then the polar opposite, like you said, what one of the other people in this movie, or a couple, did end up going.
I know the guy who plays Buscapé. His name's Alexander Rodriguez. That he's still milking this thing for all it's worth. Like he made there's a short movie where it's like City of God. Like the continuation where it's like him now as like a middle-aged man, you know, like
yeah, like he's like I'll be there.
Yeah, you know,
like, I'm Buscapé, nobody else.
Yeah, exactly. He's returned. It's like Michael Keaton as Batman, right? He's back. I wanted to talk about the movie in a couple of different aspects. I wanted to talk about how it was shot. So it's shot on 16 millimeter, which I think for sure adds to the documentary-like feel of this movie.
Yeah.
I know people like to throw that around a lot, you know, that this movie's documentary-like. But I wanted to ask you, do you feel that this movie is reminiscent of a documentary more than a feature film?
So I guess that kind of bleeds into, I think, my favorite aspect of this movie, and it reminds you of Old Boy, is that this movie sits, like you said, talk about in the top 10. Like I have a poster of this movie behind my head when I go to sleep. And I think it was the first time I really thought about how something could, style and substance being perfectly mixed, and style in the terms of, like you're saying, this looked like a documentary to me. This looked like it was real. I thought it was real as a kid, and then at the end, based on a true story, like, oh, so this happened, you know. Whether how much truth there is to that, I don't know. But I do feel like it's a documentary in certain aspects, but I think what ends up taking me out of it or reminding me that this is just a well-crafted movie is the editing style. Like
Oh,
that
for
in
sure,
its
for
own
sure.
in its own is like it's very hard to.
It's alive.
Yeah, like that
It
editing
feels like the
style
cocaine
is like,
they're selling.
Like because in Old Boy, it's the same type of editing style, honestly, but that movie in itself carries itself in a non-documentary way. Even though the story could be a documentary, if he shot in 16 millimeter, he could have gotten away with saying that Old Boy was a documentary.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I do think that the early 2000s, the one thing I always remember is like the trailers, right? Like how the pace that they moved at.
Yeah.
And also that there was just like the early 2000s was a time of like maximalist craft, like in technicality. Maybe not the story, but it's like, yeah, this thing feels like a shot of adrenaline the second it starts. It's that knife
Yeah.
off the stone, right? The sharpening stone, and then the chin, and then like all these guns, and then the police, and then a shootout, and then like, is Buscapé gonna take this picture? You know, you're just like, what is this? You know, the samba music playing in the background, and it's like all of the kids and the setting and everything, and you're just like instantly drawn in. It's like intoxicating, you know what I mean? And you just know that you're somewhere you don't belong. And something that happens with us, at least for foreign films, is that I feel transported to another world, you know, because honestly, Brazil might as well be another planet to me. You know,
Yeah.
Japan, Korea, fucking somewhere in Scandinavia, you know, these are places I will most likely never go. So these are people who might as well be on another planet, you know? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'll probably never meet a Brazilian who lives in Brazil. So movies, documentaries, music is like, this is the closest you can get to feeling what these people go through, you know, and like the kind of lives that other people live. And I do have a lot of empathy for the characters in this movie, but also at the same time, it's like there is every action has a consequence, but there's just something about this movie where you're like, wow, these people are also charming as well too, because it's like for the first, other than like Lil Z, no one in this movie really feels like they're doing this with like an intent to be evil. You know what I mean? Like, I wrote down in my notes that's like 3 of our main characters in this movie, I think they are like chaotic good, chaotic neutral, and chaotic evil, right? And I think that Benny, not Rocket, or Rocky Buscapé, sorry, if that's confusing to anyone who's listening for the first time about the movie. Benny, to me, is the chaotic good in this movie, because yes, he sells drugs, but it is a part of who it is a way for him to become a normal person, or to try to become somebody who's successful, right? And there's even a point where he wants to get out, because it's like, you know, it's not that different than people who invest in Wall Street. It's like, I hit my number, I can get out. You know what I mean? Like, time to just fuck off and go be happy and fucking listen to rock and roll and smoke weed on a farm, right? It's like goals, literally. Still, that's what I want to do with my life. But then, you know, Buscapé, because he is like the narrator and the eyes of the world, and like, even because of the unusual structure, sometimes he's narrating things that he never saw, and it's only because it's a movie that works. It's like he'll tell you something that he was not there for, because it's part of the overarching story. And it's like you said, those moments of like, oh, but we'll get to that later, you know?
That's why it feels like a documentary, though, to me, because it's like that comes off as like that's just the city's lore, and everybody knows this lore.
Yeah, and for me, he's the neutral, because yes, he is like the only one who's not a criminal or whatever, but there's also a lot of things that happen in this movie where he just kind of does the fly on the wall, you know, like, damn, Blackie's my friend, fool just got shot in the knee, and I'm just like, okay. You know what I mean? Or there's a couple of moments where he has a chance to get his revenge on Lil Z, and he doesn't. So it's like he doesn't fall between the good and the evil, you know? Like, he's not one way or the other. It's too hard to really say for him, because he's more of an observer than a participant in this world. And then Lil Z is obviously the chaotic evil. Like, I can't think of maybe a more evil character,
Yeah.
you know? Like, what, Hannibal Lecter? Honestly.
Yeah, he's that's what I was yesterday when I was watching it, prepping. I was thinking, as like, just what a perfect villain, like what a perfect antagonist, and but what, like, you're like, this guy's just straight up evil. And then the fact that they give you the whole lifetime, the 15 years, right? And you see him as a little kid. And again, a lot of these characters in here feels like survival, and they look up to these other older gangsters because that's how you get across. Look how much respect they have. But Little Zay from the beginning, like DZ, like you said at the beginning, like you just kind of tell there's something off about them, like just
It's like Michael
intentions
Myers.
of what he had. Yeah,
Like that motel scene of when the Tender Trio robs the motel, and then they dip because the cops are there, and
They
you
think
see
the
that
cops are
little
there, right?
yeah. Well, who even knows, right? Like that's the untold part of the story, right? But Lil Dce probably kills about 10, 15 people.
just laughing.
Be
the
like,
whole
and
time.
you laughing and like the goddamn Joker.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like little baby Joker. It's like South Park. Oh, it's Mexican Joker. Be like, look, it's Brazilian Joker.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know, that sequence of him doing that and just seeing like the birth of evil, because you know he's being slapped around before in
Yeah,
the beginning.
exactly, he is, yeah.
So it's like it doesn't just start because he is pure evil. It's like it's just that power struggle of the younger kids versus the older kids, and then just like the lack of any sort of order. You know what I mean?
He is also. You could just tell again the movie sets it up so perfectly because he's the one giving them already plans on what to do.
Yeah.
He's just a kid.
Yeah. So then, but the not the lead up, but after the motel murder, when you see the quick montage of him growing up through murder,
Oh, that's
of like doof, 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 when you see him getting older through each one, and you're just like, holy shit! By the time we get to our present day, this guy is a fucking serial killer.
Yeah,
You know what I
exactly.
mean? Like we're talking about a straight up serial killer here, and then.
which I like because that's what you're talking about. Like
He's so
that
charming
builds
still at the
lore.
same time.
That builds that quote unquote lore. But then you're like, this is why when they do this to he just simply couldn't shoot him. Like, and you're like, why? I don't fucking get it. When you understand with this character, look how many people he's looked in the eyes and just laughed and shot. You don't think you'd be terrified of even like I could kill him, but if I don't, I'm fucked.
Yeah.
Like, so you just don't take the risk. You're like, so, I'll wait till somebody else does it.
Yeah. And I saw some of the kids say, like the ones who played the runts, that they were scared of him. Like, because the movie is people who are not actors, they were genuinely terrified of him because he was just so good at the character that he was embodying. And just like that, like laughing at a fucking 5 or 6 year old as you shoot him in the foot. It's like, I can't really think of
He's like, no,
anything
Lincoln.
other than like Sin Nombre, where you're
Yeah.
like, fuck, that was truly brutal, you know? And you don't even see, well, you do see it actually. That one you do see. Like, that one really is meant to just like gut punch you of like, oh fuck, I can't believe, like, okay, this movie's going there, you know? So fucking good, dude.
Yeah, it's like that's what you're talking about. You have to watch maybe old John Cassavetes type stuff to get these type of performances in American films, but foreign films, because especially before they were really trying to put themselves on the map and take advantage of what they could get away with, and you know, country regulations on filmmaking weren't very big before, up until they started realizing a lot of these, you know, as they call them, quote unquote, second world countries, started realizing that their artists in their countries wanted to start making movies, so they had to set, you know, laws for that stuff. But in the U.S., very quickly we set precedent for you can't do X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z. So there's certain movies like, you know, like Easy Rider, like those only existed in Enigma when they were allowed to be made like that.
Yeah, and then other places in the world, it's like, I don't know, there's like 10 movies that are like Easy Rider, you know?
Every year still, you
Yeah.
know? And like, whether it's unethical, obviously sometimes, you know, working kids, but that's the realism in these places, that's the realism in the world. So when we're shown a movie like this, like especially from our perspective, me and you, like it becomes almost like a documentary, historical, in the aspect that you really start to be like, I do live in a different planet than these people, and
Yeah.
it's insane.
It's like a level of empathy that you can't really get, because when there's no movie characters and you're just looking at like this 15-year-old killed this 6-year-old, the American mind can't comprehend that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But when you put it in a movie, it's like Roger Ebert says, like, there's a mask that comes off, and you can find a way to empathize with the serial killer.
Exactly.
You know, because at the end of the day, as much as he murders people, he has a best friend who he loves dearly, you know? And when he dies, that is the catalyst of a war, you know? And it's like that is the final string of any type of like humanity that he has, you know?
Right.
And it's just like such a crazy catalyst, you know, because like we said, he's the chaotic good or the chaotic evil and Benny's the chaotic good. And that pivotal moment in the film when Benny dies, you realize that there is no longer any good in this movie. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, this is only going to get worse from here. Because it happens about an hour in, so then the next hour of the movie is just like a just blistering, violent, disturbing, like a piece of like not a fiction. You know, well, yeah, fiction. It's fiction at the end of the day, right? But it is just a portrait of like war in the slums.
It just
you know?
happens. Yeah, it happens twice in the movie. I think really drives that point, and it's in the in the beginning when it's Goose, right? That wants to leave with the girl.
Shaggy's the one who wants to leave with the girl.
So Shaggy's
Goose is Rocket's brother.
Okay, so
Clipper's the other guy's name. I just remembered.
Shaggy.
Yeah. Clipper's the one who goes to religion.
so yeah, he's like, I'm following the
Fuck
word
this.
of
Yeah.
God. But Shaggy and Benny are both the ones that fall in love here, and the girls are the ones that are pushing them. Be like, get the fuck out.
They're brothers in real life too.
Oh really?
Yeah, because I'm sure you noticed through the rewatch, you're like, they look exactly alike, and it's because they are. The only one who's not related is the small version of Benny, but adult Benny and Shaggy are really
they're
brothers.
Yeah. So, you know, they both fall in love, and they're both trying. Their girls pull them out, and they're, like you said, within inches of leaving the city, within minutes. And, you know, the car doesn't work. He has to push the fucking car. That gets him. He has to run and try to. The city ate him. Benny, too. Like, everybody loved him. Nobody wanted to shoot him. And even how it happens is a fucking mistake. And then he gets clapped. Just like, bro, I can't let you live. Like, you killed Benny. Like, and all of us fucked with, like, and even Carrot knows himself, like you said. The
He's like,
city's going to go to
I have
shit.
to kill you.
Because this strain, like, I'm not safe anymore because there is going to be no good stuff anymore.
Yeah, Benny is the catalyst, or not the catalyst, but he's the pin that holds the entire city together. And without him, it's it's literally like a city losing its superhero, you know, because like everybody loved him. And then like when we were talking about like the world building and stuff too, that scene affects the entire city because the entire city's there.
It's there.
It's like you got the samba people, you have the funk people, you have the hippies, you have the stoners, you have the gangbangers, the drug dealers, all who love this guy. And then when that goes away, it's like the last innocence. And then it's just fucking, it's a war zone. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Going back to, we were talking about how the movie is made. You had harped on the editing and stuff, and I just wanted to bring up who did it because, you know, I think they definitely deserve to be spotlighted. But the cinematography is Daniel Resende, and got these backwards. The cinematography is Cesar Charlone and edited by Daniel Resende. And what I learned about the cinematography in this movie is that the cinematographer and the director, they did no marks and no placeholders or anything like that for the actors. So the camera never knew where it was going to go. It was just improvised of like, oh, this guy's talking, and then like, let's move it here, let's move it here, let's move it here. And that is not traditional in any sense of the aspect. Like, that is like the antithesis of how you make movies, right? But I think that helps with the documentary feel. It also helps with the fact that the movie has a narrator, right? Because that could be very hit or miss. Some movies it's awful, but in a movie like this, with this structure of like bouncing around from story to story, different moments in time, it's like simultaneously the past, the future, and the present all going on. I do think that the camera work
Matches.
it matches, but not only that, it is becoming its own character. The camera feels like someone who is there watching, because another interesting thing about the film is that it hardly ever is scenes of one person, one individual person. It's always he's here and his friend is watching, and then two people walk by in the background and they're going to be important in 20 minutes, you know, and the camera really adds to that. You feel like you're part of this gang, you know what I mean? Or when you're with Buscapé, like you feel like you're this fly on the wall just trying to navigate without getting killed. And I think that the camera work just carries this movie in a way that it would be a lot worse if it wasn't shot this way, you know?
It ends
Like
up
it
making
really
sense.
lends itself to the structure of how they tell the story.
What I was gonna say is because of how he
Oh, the editing as well. Sorry. Yes.
maybe the editing choices that were made based off the footage that they had only makes so much sense of the intensity of them, because like you said, it feels like it's always chaotic. Everything about this movie feels chaotic, so it would make
And
sense.
sweaty and gritty and just fucking
It just ended up all culminating to make sense for that feeling that the movie, and it ends up being a feeling that the movie should evoke from the story. So then I think, because like, again, such a perfect blend of style and substance, that it ends up just being like, oh, this is why this is unique, you know. I mean, even from how it starts, just a city of God, that shot in itself is insanely creative, you know, like editing, and it's just him shooting a picture, like when it just turns into the name of the movie. Like, okay,
You know, even too, like the way that you do the cinematography and the editing, it's like when you see the city of God in the beginning, and it's just like this, like, looks like it's in the desert, right? And it's this warm yellow orange lighting, right? And that's like because the story is mostly told through Rocket's point of view, that's a fond time in his life, even though it's an awful time. You know, they're in poverty, they barely have food, there's crime, no lights, no gas, right? He still remembers that time fondly because it's like one of the last moments of his life becoming whatever you would call it. You know, I don't even know what to call it.
He says it
but-
in the narration, though, in terms of what you like. In the 60s, it was the trio, and their biggest crimes were just stealing, and that was before things became what they became, and that's why and his brother was alive, you know. So.
And with the editing too, like, there's an amazing shot in this movie where after the Tender Trio is killed, Rocket and I don't know if it's Blackie or if it's one of the other guys, but they're walking to school, and a van passes by them, and then they're older, and everything's blue, and the city itself is also, it's a slum, but it's like now instead of just being like clay houses or whatever, it's like you see brick, you see the metal panels, you see cars, you know, you see light poles, and just within 2 seconds of editing and cinematography, you're just like, oh, okay, like time has shifted,
10
you know,
years.
and like 10 years. And then the other thing too, what I really like about this movie is the use of locations, how they shoot the locations, right? It isn't like this movie, sorry, I'm getting a little mixed up here. This movie has the whole, the city is a character, right? And it does it in a way that's masterful, honestly. Like, I do think that this movie is an example of how you do the city is alive and is a character in this movie, right? And the way they shoot it, there's not a lot of B-roll in this movie, right? Which is like, that is a tool that a director with privilege gets to do. Is like, yeah, let's just have fucking, I don't know, let's go up in the helicopter and shoot the skyline, trees, whatever bullshit you see, right? And a movie that is made on a budget like this, you're not gonna, there's no B-roll.
Yeah, exactly.
It's 16 millimeter. Like, we got a couple minutes here
Everything
between
you
each
shoot,
roll.
yeah.
There's none of that bullshit, right? And it cuts out so much of that fat. But they show you a location, and then the way the characters move within the location, that, you know, an hour into this movie, you're like, I can figure out the layout of this city. And when there's chases, and, you know, or when Rocket goes from the beach to the apartment to buy weed, you start to realize, like, oh, this is here, this is here, this is here. And I think that's why it's done so well, because, like, that's what I mean about that, like, that open world format, you know? It's like, this movie is, like, built the way that, like, a game like Breath of the Wild is built. You know what I
there's
mean?
a scene, I'm pretty sure, I'm not sure if it's the exact statue, but it's the Christ the Redeemer statue. There's a shot where it's showing in the beachfront where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, two characters are just sitting, but they look so small in comparison to the whole, you know, is showing you the Brazilian beach and everything. And I think that's what you're talking about, where the city is the overlaying character here that is bigger than any of them. And that's why when they end up dying there or whatever, it does feel like the city swallowed you. The city took you. Because the city, it always reminds you that the city in itself is a maze, and it's always changing. And it's also hiding and showing you things
It's
that
like
need
the
to
city is
forward.
not going to let you go. you were a prisoner of this city.
You're part of my city. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, that ends up feeling very poetic in terms of, because it's a city of God, and you have people who are honest people here also, but they have also had to end up living in the world or getting used to the world that they live in. And
I wanted to bring that up because, you know, if anybody's ever seen like Narcos or anything like that, they would know that this happens in places where there is a lack of any real law and order, right? And it's like, I'm saying that a lot. Like, I hope I don't sound like I'm some fucking cop lover or whatever. But then, you know, complain about the cops in America all you want. Go live in Brazil in the slums and tell me that you don't like the fact that there's like, yeah, this doesn't just happen here. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, if your store gets robbed here, you can call the cops. Are they going to help you? To be determined. Right?
Yeah, it depends.
Yeah, maybe. Be like, if they happen to actually catch the guy, most of the time they're just like, no, I didn't see it happen. So, is he here? Did you detain him for me? Right?
Yeah.
But what are you going to do in a place like this, right? So the people become like in a chokehold to the drug dealers and the criminals, because Little Z is an evil person, but he also understands that your city has to have some kind of regulations or the cops are going to come in here. So there's like I say supposedly, there's no raping and no stealing in the city of God, right? Which we see later on. It's like, unless you're Little Z, you get to do whatever you want, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But like even that sense of like someone needs to be in control because nobody is in control. But the problem is the power vacuum that creates, you know? And it's like, is this 18-year-old kid or is this 30-year-old guy going to be the person who's like the king around here, you know? And I wanted to bring that up too with Little Z because that is really the pivotal story structure, or like not story structure but narrative. Sorry, it's like this movie really feels like a lot of like vignettes or shorts or like a novel because it bounces around so much and it tells you all these different important things that happen. But the main story narrative here is the ongoing war between Carrot and Knockout Ned and Little Z. Yeah. And that is real. Like, because at the end you see the credits, it shows the real people. And then also, like, when Knockout Ned is being interviewed by the news, you see that real footage, and you're like, you know, obviously some of this is exaggerated, but this happened to a point. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring that up is because earlier when you were talking about how they made this movie, right? It's like, yeah, they get the kids. Yes, they film in Brazil, but they couldn't film in the actual city of God because guess why? Gang activity. They had to film in a favela that was like close, next to it.
Yeah.
And they weren't allowed to have real security. The gang lords or whatever were securing the set because they're like, no, we're not gonna let fucking security guards in here or cops or whatever. Like, you can come with us and we'll take care of you. So like even that environment too is just. See, they don't make them like this anymore. Is what I'm getting at.
The Knockout Ned story ends up coming honestly at the end of maybe the second.
End of the second act, beginning of the third, and you could argue that Knockout Ned is the main character.
That's what I was gonna say. Is that that's just something that I forgot from years of not watching it, of how intense and everything gets in that situation, and because he's the polar opposite of Little Z, that like the hate that fumes there. That like it seems like he specifically really hates him, you know, and then it moves that really fast, which is insane to think about because this whole time in the movie, you've seen how evil he is and stuff, but you haven't seen him get vulnerable, and it's obviously dating women the right way, right? The correct way.
Yeah.
Attracting women, and of course it is.
He's a fucking loser. Like, yeah, and he's scary.
Yeah, so, but that is what makes, you know, that is what would push somebody like that to do even crazier stuff, right? And I think the fact that they end up using that and the Knockout Ned ends up being...
And now he's an incel too? Lil Zay is not only evil, he's an incel?
Yeah. It's like, why don't... Yeah.
Involuntary celibate, people.
So... and I just thought that aspect after watching it yesterday is such a groove in the story that I forgot that it's so strong. Like you said, you could argue he's the main character because the whole time he's been around, and he tells you in the beginning, like, this is Knockout Ned. You don't need to know about him yet. It's not important, but you will.
His story, yeah. And it's like he pushes the story even further than what Benny does, you know? And like I brought up the chaotic chart, right, of evil, good, neutral. If you wanted to compare it to like something like The Dark Knight, Knockout Ned is Harvey Dent. You know, it's like he is a good person who was corrupted by this city and the things that happened to him. And then by the end, if you only know the story of Knockout Ned at the end of his life when he's killed, you would never know that this is a veteran. You know what I mean? Like, this is a guy who used to do things the right way. This is a guy who didn't want to hurt innocent people. But then this is what we mean about the city being alive and like eating you and corrupting you. And it's like, this happened to him because of where he is, not because of who he is.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk about too, it's like we did the actions and consequences, but Knockout Ned is the epitome of what this movie is, because the flow chart from his introduction to the end of the movie just shows you it's like this leads to this, which leads to this, which leads to this. The first time you see Knockout Ned is not on the bus. It's when they cut to Little Z as an 18-year-old and talking about how he's one of the most respected hoods, and he bumps into a guy and he slaps him on the back of the head and he's like, "Fuck you, you know, who the fuck are you, blah 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 blah." And the guy's like, "Oh hey, whoa 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 whoa."
Yeah.
That's Knockout Ned.
Yeah.
Be like, and then, you know, when Rocket decides he might try a life of crime because he got fired from the grocery store, Knockout Ned is on the bus, right? He works on the bus and he's like no, he's cool as fuck. You know, like, I don't want to do that to him. And then Knockout Ned is gone for a while, right? But then Little Z rapes his girlfriend. What are you gonna do? It is not far-fetched that he decides to fuck this guy. Like, let's kill Little Z, you know? And there's only one person to go to, and that's Carrot. And Carrot and Little Z hate each other because they want each other's turf, right? This turns Ned to a life of crime, but there's an exception. No innocent people, right? Until the exception is broken, and in self-defense, he has to kill somebody. Who does he kill? Some kid's dad, right? Kids start joining their gangs. They're handing out guns to people on the street. Ned gets shot. Who does he get shot by?
The kid.
You don't know who he gets shot by. Then what is the reveal at the end after Ned has been in prison or in the hospital, broken out, gang wars on the street? He's shot again and he's killed. And you realize that the person who killed him and shot him the first time is the son of the person that he killed, the innocent person who he didn't want to kill, you know? And that is just the way that this world operates.
And then that's a story.
And both of them are dead at the end. No one won.
It's a story of so much resentment, passion between the characters, a side character that you know that you feel like you could feel it. Of course, he wanted to kill him. He killed his dad, and there's other movies where you're like, okay, you just told me that information, but I'm supposed to believe that's a driving force for you now. Now this matters, but that would be a whole main story in another movie, you know, that whole predicament. And then here it's just, this is a side note of why he ended up being dead. Did you forget that he did this?
I mean, shit, that kid Otto's story is like the fucking Northman. Like,
yeah,
literally.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to wait and get my fucking revenge on the guy who killed my dad.
You forgot.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Oh, you forgot?
Yeah.
I didn't fucking forget.
Exactly.
You know, you ruined my life.
Exactly.
And that's just one of the many reasons why this movie's so good. But that right there is just like, that's storytelling and story structure and narrative in a way that no one's doing that anymore.
No, I think that third act in the movie just insane. Like, especially after Benny dies, it goes up to another level, and it really just ends up being one of those movies where like this starts so good and it ends even better, you know?
Yeah. So we've talked about the movie quite a bit, right? Obviously, you need to see this movie. We still didn't give away everything, even though we've talked about so much. But there's so much that happens in this movie that's like, you just have to watch it. So if you have Paramount Plus or your Prime Video or whatever, you know, however you want to watch it, just please do, because this is a very integral piece of cinema. And it's like, and if you want to expand your palette, this is like the way to do it, is a movie like this. I kind of want to talk now less about the movie itself and just about like the inspirations for the movie, people who have talked about this movie, how influential this movie is, and just like the world of cinema and stuff like that. So when it came out in 2002, it's like went to Cannes, right? Bunch of awards. But, you know, Roger Ebert's like, this is one of the best movies of the 21st century. This is one of the best movies of all time. A big lover of this movie, ties back to a movie we did recently, Robert Altman, right? He was very open about how much he loved this movie and how well done it is and how it pushes the boundaries of what cinema can be. And it's like, we haven't even said this yet, but this movie is like total cinema. It can only exist as this.
Yeah.
Right?
Because the book existence is not the same, obviously.
It's not going to be the same. No. You just can't get, it's just not. I'm sorry. The visual and the audio aspect of a film is just,
How many awards did the book
it gets
win?
into your brain in a way that like reading words can't, you know?
Yeah.
But the influences of this movie, it's like, yeah, I can see that Robert Altman inspired this movie, because Fernando Mireya said that like Robert Altman is one of his big inspirations of how to make movies. And then now that we've seen some Robert Altman stuff, you're like, yeah, this is just like that, but it's told from a different perspective, from a different part of the world. But the characters coming in and out of frame, this guy's going to be important in 30 minutes. Let's jump back and forward in time. There's because it's all in subtitle. Like, bro, there's 4 different subtitle lines going on at once. You know, it's like I don't even know how to read this in some points. You know, and it's just that's Altman. You know,
I couldn't help but think of Scorsese too, and
obviously. So you're stepping on my next point here,
the Goodfellas.
which is I wanted to ask you. This has been regarded as the Brazilian Goodfellas. I'm gonna lay it down here. Is this movie better than Goodfellas? You can't. Don't just. It's Martin Scorsese. It's Goodfellas. You can't ever say that.
Check this out. I said last night to my brother, I was like, everybody always talks about, and it's the scene where it's Little Zay and his gang, and like the chicken. I was like, everybody always talks about Goodfellas, like the perfect gangster movie, but this is gangster to me. Like that's Italian gangster, which is a whole other thing, right? More organized crimes, but like this is straight grit. This is straight. So I have the quick answer. No, I do think this is better than Goodfellas, and obviously Fernando Meirelles is not a better director.
No.
Than Martin.
Martin Scorsese is probably the best director alive, and maybe ever.
But that's what it is. That's what the beauty of the Jeremy Lin run, like that's literally like he is a very well regarded filmmaker, obviously. And
4 years ago, he was our Two Popes, that movie with Anthony Hopkins.
I heard about
that. That's him.
And then also there was another film 4 years after, I don't remember the name of it, that he got a lot of love for too. That I'm now interested after looking at it. I'll watch that too. So he is a very good director, but this film is just, I think, because we bring him up, like Martin Scorsese restores a lot of old films, right? This movie and Martin Scorsese on their own are the only reason I watched another Brazilian movie that he restored personally, and it just really made me think, like,
was it Pio?
Yeah, Pichote.
Yeah.
And like that's very, very similar to this movie, because it's the same thing. A bunch of people who weren't actors. The main actor kid had lived a terrible life after the movie, but it's about literally these kids trying to survive in another part of Brazil that doesn't get any of the love that Rio does, or any of the love that Sao Paulo does. And
that's funny, because even as, I don't want to say awful as this place is, right? It's like Rio de Janeiro is,
I know where that is,
one of the most popular places on earth.
Yeah.
And like you're saying with Pichote, like, I don't fucking know. I know Sao Paulo, I know Rio, and that's it.
Yeah, and everywhere else, be like, you're like, sure, maybe I've heard it in passing, but I'm not about to tell you I know about these places. And that's like California. I know LA. I know San Francisco.
What about
San Diego?
Yeah.
Like,
what's Fresno?
Exactly. So like, as I watch this movie now with the lens of how we watch movies, which was completely new, was just to know, like, I know Martin Scorsese loves this movie.
And working with Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro and Ray Liotta and all these famous people is a lot different than pulling these performances from people off the street. It just is. And that is something that Goodfellas does not have and could not do. And I know we're comparing it to it, but it honestly reminds me a little more of Harsh Times. Mm-hmm. Because that is the beginning of Scorsese doing this thing. It does. And it's like, this is more similar to that in terms of like the characters themselves. Because like you said, Goodfellas is like businessmen, it's like businessmen, organized crime that is involved with violence. But something about this, like this street level holdups and gun wars or whatever, right? But then somehow this movie is like epic in scale. Like I would say this is an epic crime drama. Like you can't describe this movie any other way. The scope itself is small, but the movie and the
What happens.
expansiveness of everything, it's like, it's just
The world building.
so good. And yeah, like I will agree with you 100% that I do think that this is a better movie than Goodfellas.
And we're talking about, you know, comparing a diamond to a diamond, but if we have to compare them, like I do, even in terms of when I rated things, you know, like this is a perfect 5 to me. So this is in my top 10. Goodfellas is not. So it's funny that I brought it up before you brought up your point, because yesterday when I was watching it, I don't know why I was like, specifically, I was like, this is better than Goodfellas.
You know, Goodfellas is in my top 10 too. So it's like these two crime movies are
These are
probably
diamond to
like
diamond.
diamond and diamond. Yeah, you know, it's like I have a few horror movies. You know, I'm not gonna get into my top 10 now, but yeah, both the last time I did make my top 10, they're both in there.
Yeah.
But if I had to pick another Scorsese movie, I could do that. You know, so it's like I could be like, oh, Raging Bull. That's Martin Scorsese's, my favorite Martin Scorsese movie, or whatever. But with Fernando Mireles, like you said, you don't have as much as Martin Scorsese. So it's like the lightning in a bottle that he captured here. It's like Martin Scorsese, you could argue, made his best movie before and after Goodfellas.
Yeah, exactly.
Like this guy caught something. It's lightning in a bottle. You can't replicate this.
No, and again, maybe there's a bias there that in Goodfellas, you know, good actors, bigger scale, more money, director already established at this point. When
20 plus years of filmmaking at that point,
and
too.
I can visit where all these things took part. Yes, I can go to Brazil, like you said, but I also it's foreign to
This is
me.
one of Martin Scorsese's comebacks.
Yeah,
Sorry, bless you.
because he had all the quote unquote flops where people were like, you know,
The drug problems, heart
Yeah.
attacks and stuff. Like, bro, put the cocaine down.
So, I think that's where this movie maybe surpasses to me. That's the same way I feel about any, like, The Wailing with me. And I'm like, this is so beyond what as an American I can comprehend would be a curse, because I just think that would never happen. Because that's too, this is the wrong word, but it's like that's just too primal. It doesn't happen here anymore. We don't live like that. We don't live like
We're a
animals.
developed country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like when there's like we've talked about this before in a bunch of movies, when there's a curse in a Scandinavian country, I believe it's gonna happen. So that's the same way here.
When I see a movie and the house is clay and the roof is hay,
Yeah.
I'm like, that curse is real. That curse is for sure
the,
real.
The wich lives there.
Yeah, and like I think of like, you know, a random movie to bring up in comparison to this would be like 3,000 Years of Longing. I'm like, too much 5G, too much Wi-Fi.
no.
Genies couldn't exist here, you know?
No one saw the genie.
Yeah.
Really? Like, so that's what it comes down to. I do think, whether it's subconscious or unconscious, I do think that's when I end up being like,
It's our American prejudice that we can't, like, the American brain cannot comprehend.
like Parasite, right? You're like, they're so rich, and then like, oh, look how poor they are. That seems real to me. Yeah. that's why it's such a good movie. But I mean, obviously, we could gloat about this movie as much as I do think it's amazing. It is one of my favorite movies. Like you said, it's in my top 10. I think it was one of the components to me as a kid, understanding that movies can be just much more than our character being good at two things at the end. Thinking that a character like Little Zay, as much as I hated him as a kid, thought he was still really fucking badass. And movies allow you to have those opinions the same way that you could love Darth Vader, you could love Michael Myers, get it tattooed on you. Terrible people, but it makes you really love movies more because you're like, this is storytelling. I hate this person I've never met.
I hate this fake person. Yeah, they're so
like,
bad.
Or like, and then in this aspect is because, like you said, you know that these things did happen. So in this context, no, he's a person like this existed in Brazil, and exists outside of Brazil. So, you know, as somebody who is not in a crime world, the innocent people who die here or have to pay prices is to me very disgusting. But this, like, the Mask of Cinema makes it to me like, I love that I got to go into the scope of this world.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that whether it be Martin Scorsese or Fernando Mireles or insert horror director here, Tobe Hooper with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you're not supposed to watch these movies and be like, I want to do that. These are cautionary tales.
Yeah.
You know, where
Of
you're supposed to be like, look what would happen. Like, if you get into this life, look how bad it can get, you know?
Man-made horrors beyond my comprehension.
Exactly. So I think this is a good place to wrap it up. We just gushed for an hour about this movie, but I also think we covered
It's not
a
even
lot
enough,
of ground.
honestly, because we could keep
Yeah, but we're
We don't
going to
have
repeat
to.
ourselves. go watch this fucking movie, and you'll see, like, you guys didn't need to do this. You should have just told me to watch the movie. The podcast should be like, watch this fucking movie. Be like, that's it. If you don't like this movie, I might have to revoke the card, bro. The cinema card. Like, your opinion cannot be trusted.
This passed the test of my my brother being completely engrossed in playing FIFA online competitively, and me playing this movie and him losing 3 straight games because he kept looking over and asking me questions of like, "Damn, this is so cool."
Yeah, I know.
I usually always, there's other movies that I watch where I think he looks like this is fucking slow and he doesn't pay attention. Like, fine, but this movie, even he was like, "What the fuck?"
Hey, when you had Come and See on, he's like, boring.
Yeah, I mean, like, what are these Russian? What?
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is a good place to end it. As always, like, subscribe, comment. You know where we stand on this movie. Like you said, top 10er for us. Highly regarded within the podcast. So take our word of advice and check this fucking movie
If there was a Mount Rushmore of movies, that we had put on the podcast up here, this one would be.
Last thing I'll say. We never do this, but we talked about a few other movies that would be like companion pieces, right? So if you want to watch this movie and you want to check out similar movies, I would say watch Pichote, like you said, right? Watch Lahane, watch Kids, and watch City of God, and you'll have a worldly view of like crime and youth. You know what I mean?
And Salo. Watch Salo.
Yeah. All right, relax. That's a whole different type of movie. But yeah, I do think that's like a worldly view of like the kind of things that really only happen with the youth too, as well. Like,
especially in decades before too, when stuff was obviously
kids are soft now. Like, that's just a fact.
Even from other countries, they're softer than they were.
Yeah, they're playing Fortnite.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Twitch streaming and whatever, and it's like these are kind of worlds that don't exist that much anymore, unless
which is a good thing, obviously.
Unless you're outside.
Yeah, which is a good thing. But the story-wise, knowing what piques our interest as humans,
is a much more intriguing time.
Yes.
Yeah. So check those movies out as well if you would like other recommendations, and let us know what you think. If you watch all those movies, let us know which one was your favorite.
Yeah.
Like, subscribe, comment. I'm Gus. As always, Alvaro.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.